Donald Jeffries. Author of Hidden History and Survival of the Richest. Host of The Donald Jeffries Show. Billy Ray Valentine. Host of the Infinite Fringe podcast. Researcher, truth seeker from the Bronx, New York. Tony Arterburn. Radio host, combat veteran, precious metals analyst, and alt historian. Together, they take on the headlines of the week, decode the disinformation, and plow through the mainstream propaganda. Unauthorized, unscripted, and unintimidated. This is America Unplugged.
That is correct. Unjabbed, unafraid, unintimidated, unreal, unreasonable, untimely. I think we started about 5 minutes late. So good to be here, ladies and gents. I'm Tony Arterburn. I am one of your hosts. Billy Ray Valentine has traveled to Switzerland. He is going to talk directly to CERN to tell it to stop it. Stop what you're doing. We're tired of the dimensional changes that you're causing in this realm. So our prayers are with Billy. You're our only hope, sir. I'm joined with one of the usual suspects, which is the legendary Donald Jeffries, and I get to talk to Donald Jeffries on 11/22/25, which is the anniversary of the JFK assassination. And I was talking to our guest host offline, Don, and I was saying, there's few people on this planet that know as much about the JFK assassination as you. So, welcome to your own show, sir.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, that's because most of them are dead now. I'm the last one standing, but that knew a lot. But I'm getting close because I started out so young. I'm getting close to being the dean of the research committee. Not that you'd know it from the research community because they don't want to have much to do with me. But 62 years later, and we're still no closer to the truth. I'm still waiting for the lovely Representative Luna to get to the truth of it. She held a couple of hearings, and that's been the end of it. So, they're not they released the files earlier this year, which were actually interesting because they did have some things that had been redacted that Tulsi Gabbard personally saw that weren't redacted any longer. And they all had to do with Israel. Most had to do with James Jesus Angleton. So I think at this point, we should all know that, whatever CIA involvement was coordinated by Angleton and not Dulles. So I think we need to, and there's some kind of an Israel connection. I don't know what it is, but considering the way the world is and everybody else, there seems to be an Israeli connection to everything. So that shouldn't be surprising. And more people, I think, are understanding that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I'd like to touch on some of that today in the show, too, because it seems like, if this is a show about calling out trends, that's a massive watershed moment that's happening right now on the PR for the good old Israelis. Also joining us from Knights of the Storm, we have Ashley. No last name, just the first
name. Beyonce.
Hello. Yes, that's it. Yeah, I'm taking after Beyonce and just trying the one name thing. I'm hoping it's gonna catch on for me. That's gonna lead to fame and fortune. Fingers crossed.
It's smart.
Yeah,
it's good branding. It's good.
Thank you.
There's only one. There should be only one, kind of like Highlander for Ashley's.
Exactly.
Okay.
There you go. That was what I was thinking, and not protecting myself from cancel culture.
Well, welcome to America Unplugged, and you're filling in for Billy today. And Don's here. We talked about the 11/22. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. You have any questions for Don on that? Or you and I spoke off air, and this was actually I asked Ashley. I said, "What do you want to talk about?" She names 3 things. Don comes on and said, "What do you want to talk about?" The exact same things in the exact same sequence. So I think you guys are conspiring. This is some sort of y'all are doing something off air to confuse me. But no, what did you have any questions for Don on 11/22? What happened 62 years ago?
Yeah, so I feel very, very honored to be able to be talking to Don on this day. We know it's a special day in remembrance of the assassination of JFK. So he touched on it a little bit because that was one question that I did have was, what new information, if anything, as a skilled researcher, did you glean from the documents that ended up being released? And he did answer that question a little bit. But the other thing would be, because I think that sometimes, depending on where you're at in the truth community or the whatever you call this, liberty community, that people have different focuses. But I like to bring up the importance of parapolitics. That's something that I'm very interested in. So then my other question to Don would be, why does this still matter today?
Yeah, well, I think for everyone alive today, I mean, there's a lot of boomers, and for the boomers, the JFK assassination was a seminal event. It's very much like 9/11 was for millennials. You know, most took place during our childhood, or some people that are alive were older, teenagers or even young adults in the JFK assassination. But it had an earth-shattering effect, and it sounds cliche, but we really did lose our innocence that day. I think Americans never looked at their country again. I don't think the '60s would have been the '60s without the JFK assassination, because you wouldn't have had the Vietnam War. JFK was planning. The most notable thing that changed after he died was the fact you had National Security Action Memorandum 263, which Oliver Stone talked a lot about, which had already started to delineate the process of withdrawal from Vietnam. 1,000 troops were going to be, and there were not many troops there then. There weren't no combat troops. They were supposed to be out by the end of 1963, and all Americans were supposed to be out by the beginning of 1965. Now you have people like Noam Chomsky and people on the left who claim this is a lie. I still have people arguing with me. No, it's not a lie. It's very, and you can hear Kennedy told all his advisors in his last press conference, he talked about getting out of Vietnam. Again, the evidence is overwhelming, but they don't want to admit that because they want to act as if it was a seamless transition to LBJ, and that JFK would have done the same thing. No, he absolutely would not have. And if you wanted the clearest evidence of conspiracy, was the fact that McGeorge Bundy, who was an inside conspirator, I feel confident in saying, he's National Security Advisor, he wrote National Security Action Memorandum 273 on the day of the assassination. And it completely flip-flopped the withdrawal process and talked about supporting them. JFK would have never signed that, and he would have fired Bundy on the spot for writing it. So, I mean, I think that alone proves, and of course, JFK never got to see it, and LBJ couldn't sign it fast enough. So that was a huge reason why I think but there were other reasons, and we didn't come until I talked a little about Israel earlier, and the much smeared and maligned Michael Collins Piper, who unfortunately died way too young. He wrote a book called Final Judgment back in the right about the time JFK's film came out, maybe a little bit before. It became like an underground bestseller because it was, obviously nobody credible would publish it, but he was the first one to talk about the Israeli involvement. He talked about the feud that we now know for sure was happening between JFK and David Ben-Gurion. At the time of the assassination, they were involved in lots of angry exchanges that had been going on for months because JFK objected to the development of nuclear weapons by the Israelis. And he said, no, you absolutely cannot do this, or we're going to stop giving you aid. Last president to stand up to Israel. And so this is very important. And now the community, somebody mentioned Gene Eugenio, John Bassingland, I think, in there, who I know. I've interviewed him, and we've exchanged things many times online. Good researcher, but he's one of many now who talks about Israeli involvement, but they never mention Michael Collins Piper. And I always try to say, give this guy credit at least. He's dead, he can't be around it, but he's the one that first unearthed it. Now it seems to be heading more and more towards that direction with Angleton's name being all over these files. So I think you have to look at that, and that's why unlike people in the community, I don't believe there were rogue CIA agents. There was nothing rogue about any of this, the mob, all that kind of stuff. These were people at the highest levels of the government with some kind of Israeli involvement. And they conspired. The people in the Pentagon, there were people like, Curtis LeMay, Dr. Strangelove, these people. And Alan Dulles certainly wanted him dead. All these people, J. Edgar Hoover, all these people cheered when he died. LBJ, you had the most powerful people in the government conspiring to do it. How they did it exactly, I don't think is as important as the fact that it was done and that they were involved in it. But you have too many people that want a limited conspiracy. We've been having 60 now. I think there's going to be a special on ABC or one of them Monday, Who Killed JFK, and Oliver Stone's going to be on. I think DiEugenio, who's his best friend now, I think he's going to be on too. So they'll let them get something in there, but I would be shocked if the premise of the program isn't that Oswald did it, because they have never had anything other than Oliver Stone's JFK movie in 1991, which that's why it comes. And there's a book called The Book of the Film, JFK. It's a good thing to read if you're not reading my books. Get that sometime, and you'll see all the unbelievable hate and attacks that went after Oliver Stone for making that film. Dan Rather, 3 different times before the film even came out, editorialized against it. He was on the CBS Evening News because he was hosting it then. So this is, this was a huge conspiracy. And 60 some years later, you wouldn't still have people, a whole new generation of so-called journalists. They're lying the exact same way because they cannot possibly. And this is, it's not like this is, because in my books, I go back go back to Pearl Harbor, go back to Lincoln, all the way back. The crimes and conspiracies have been going on forever. But this was a seminal event for the people alive today. Even the young people know they look at JFK and they see how he sounded and he was very elegant. And it's such a contrast to the politicians we have today. I mean, it's like yin and yang. And people, and the more I studied JFK, that's why I continue to be a Kennedy fanboy, because he was doing a lot of good. He was trying to do something good. And, he may or may not have been trying to rein in the Federal Reserve. But we know his father, Joe Kennedy Sr., who I trying to personally resurrect his reputation, he was one of the first critics a very vocal critic of the Federal Reserve, and he talked politics with his sons all the time. So JFK and RFK and Teddy Kennedy, they were steeped on hearing this stuff. Plus, he talked a lot about Jewish power and Jewish involvement. They heard all this growing up. So when Kennedy went in the White House, I'm sure that a lot of these people were just appalled, and because they knew that he was his father's son, and he had a target on his back the entire time. And then when he started saying in private, "I want to abolish the CIA and splinter it into a million pieces," he gets in an argument with David Ben Gurion about Israel developing nuclear weapons. He resists the call to war over and over again, which no president ever had. You can see somebody like Trump still, they bomb Iran, he does it. Bomb Syria, he does it. Obama bombed 7 countries. No president ever done it, but he said, "No, I'm not going to go to war over the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not going to do that. No, I'm getting out of Vietnam." And then they come up with Operation Northwoods, which was an insane plan that we didn't even find out until the 1990s. It accidentally got released with the Assassination Records and Review Board documents that came about because of Oliver Stone's film. And we learned about this Operation Northwoods madness, which was a plan that sounds very Sandy Hookish Boston bombing stuff. It's like planning. They were, use actors. They were going to have fake plane crashes. I'm not sure how many were real or fake, but they were going to kill or pretend to kill a bunch of people and blame it all on Cuba to try to get them to go to war again. And Kennedy, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, everybody approved it. And Kennedy, to a man, said, "No, this is insane." Just like he single-handedly stopped going to war with Cuba over the missiles. He and his brothers, RFK, said, "No, we're not doing this." And so he was not listening to anything they said. He was the last president to think he was in charge. And that's why I think today, why it's so important, because young people can see, they can listen to him. They can listen to his American University speech, June 1963, a few months before they killed him. And, he wrote his death warrant with that speech. I think it's the greatest speech by an American politician ever. And his father, who was a World War I protester, part of the American First Movement, World War II, he got it naturally from him. His father preached peace, and that's what he came out in that speech. It's beautiful. It's the first. You've never heard an American politician look at the enemies of the moment, which were the Soviets then, in human terms, and talked about they breathe the same air we do. They cherish their children's future. You've never heard a politician say that kind of stuff. He was very, very different. And so I think it matters, because if his assassination had such a domino effect, it created 1960s because Vietnam, whether it created the council culture. I don't know if you would have had drug issues or not. And who knows? With the free love and all that, who knows if none of that might have happened. I don't know, because it would have been so different. But when Kennedy symbolically was replaced, this handsome movie star guy that was, like a movie star, was replaced by this crude hick politician that was obviously, he was FDR's underling. He used to follow him around like a puppy dog when he was young. LBJ had no morals, no scruples at all. So to go from that to LBJ, I think it was such a shock and a slap in the face. And as a little 7-year-old, I heard so much from, my parents. They all thought Johnson did it because they hated him so much. And so I was steeped in the way he acted. He didn't know how to act appropriately and kind of acted guilty. But you look at what the 60s would have been without him. RFK would have never been assassinated because JFK, MLK probably not either. Chappaquiddick probably would have never happened. All these things, the JFK Jr. assassination, all of that is tied together. Watergate, because Nixon would have never been president. So the whole history of the country would have been different. It was all changed by that one act. And even if that wasn't the fact that they sold us, it took me as a teenager, when I first started realizing there were books about this and started reading it, it took me like, I don't know, half an hour to look over the evidence and say, "This is impossible." Yeah, obviously, they did not possibly happened. And Chris Buchan talks about the wink on Air Force One. Absolutely, you can find Congressman Albert. They even taught these things on that Air Force One photo where LBJ cruelly forced Jackie Kennedy to stand next to him with the blood still on her dress, and she was in a state of shock. And Lady Bird Johnson is smiling maniacally like a insane person inappropriately, and then behind him is Albert Thomas, a good old boy congressman, and he's caught in the middle of winking. LBJ's turning his head to him, and he winks at LBJ. And I don't know what that means, but it's pretty creepy. But so yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that it's very much a starting point for when we look at the conspiracy world today. Conspiracy theories became a popular term because of the April 1st, 1967 CIA memo that talked about countering criticism of the Warren Report. And if you read that memo, it's still out there to read. It applies for any of these other subjects. And they talked about using assets in the media because we didn't know about Operation Mockingbird then. And we know from the little bit of Doge releases we got that there's 6,000 journalists around the world that USAID was paying. So it's obviously a huge extension of Operation Mockingbird. So it's still there. And JFK assassination was the first. Even today, when they talk about conspiracy, grassy knoll stuff, and it's all this stuff is coming. It's associated with that. That's a starting point for people that were alive today. Go back farther, of course, Pearl Harbor and all the other stuff. But so I think it's important if you can try to prove them. And again, and I'm never going to say the first, but we need to start. People ask me all the time who killed Kennedy, and I say, look, I start from the premise that whoever did it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. That's for sure. That's 100% sure. Whoever did it, he didn't. So they lied to you, and they're still lying to you over 60 years later. They're still trying to claim this guy did it. So to figure out why and who's lying to you, all the government agencies, all of the mainstream media, most of Hollywood, except for followers don't. So that's what we figure out. So I think it's very important because, I don't know that you would have had any of these other things. If they hadn't been successful in killing JFK, who knows what you might not have had the war on terror, the return of the birth of neocons and all this stuff. So anyhow, that was a long-winded answer.
No, it's beautiful, Don. Excellent breakdown. I remember watching an interview that Pat Buchanan did years ago, and of course, I'm a fan of Pat. I think you are too.
Yep.
His book, The Death of the West, was course correction in my life intellectually. I think I really gravitated towards his work after that. But someone asked him about the decline of the West. They asked him what date that he believed that it started, or at least accelerated. And he said, without a doubt, November 22nd, 1963. Yeah. And I think that's really true. I mean, everything about our culture, the belief in institutions, and in the court of public opinion, by the time mid 90s, was majority of people did not believe the official story. But in the 60s, it was still remnants of the old America where, Jim Marrs talked about this. He wrote the book Crossfire that was the inspiration for the JFK movie. But he said, it's impolite to talk about it. To talk about the suspicions that things were not as they seemed or the official narrative was bunk. Leading up into, starting where you got into the work with Mark Lane and others in the early 70s, it was still impolite to even talk about that. What was that like back then, Don? We're in a different world now.
It was, and that's why I said, it was the death of innocence, because it was the first time. Again, you had the Pearl Harbor. The America First movement collapsed when that happened. nobody questioned, well, isn't this a fortuitous thing? We've been talking about this, and suddenly this happened, so we have to go in and plant our victory gardens and buy bonds. It was very, very, amazing coincidence. But in this case, people, and you actually, public opinion polls almost from the beginning, and certainly by the time 1965, when the first books like Mark Twain's Rush to Judgment and Harold Weisberg's Whitebush, when they started being published, already the majority of the public doubted the Warren Commission's findings, and that had never happened before. They never doubted anything the government had to say. You had some people like me that were really browsers, that existed a long time ago, but not like this. And by the time I became involved in research, which is the mid-'70s. I was a teenager working for Mark Lanes, who was my hero, volunteering for his Citizens Committee of Inquiry. Public opinion polls at the time were probably 80 to 90%, though the public thought there was a conspiracy. It's actually, unfortunately, gone down since then because you've got a lot of neocons and things have changed, and a lot of the smear attacks on Kennedy, starting with Gina Campbell-Exter, and I've written a lot about that as well. This is nonsense, but it's designed to diminish his reputation so people won't care as much about, oh, he was a bad guy, he's terrible, I don't care who killed him, what does it matter? But and that's why Congress did reopen it. That's what we were doing. We were trying to lobby Congress to reopen it, and House Select Committee on Assassinations did. It was, very disillusioning for me. It really opened my eyes as a young guy, and I started to realize, well, maybe, being a radical Democrat is not going to, it really sucks, because that's what I was. And, when I saw people, the good guys, the supposed good guys, Democrats lying and still supporting the single bullet theory and all that stuff, I realized, wow, this is really huge. And so for me and for lots of people like me, not everybody did what I did and just became more and more radical. Some people, I guess, just gave up. But yeah, this is so if we look at the situation now where we see all these things happen, and it'll segue kind of into some of the things that are happening now. But so when you see something like Doge that was long overdue, it's not a left-right thing. That would come from the right. And then it disappears. It gets predictable criticism. It's gone. Nobody's held accountable for this stuff, and nobody talks about, well, what about those 6,000 journalists? What about all these other things we did? It's just gone. It's like, and so that's why the most recent thing, we'll talk about that. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who looks like one of the few good people in Congress, well, she just inexplicably decides to resign. So again, the one person who is criticizing Israel and Jews, in particular, Jewish power in America, more than any congressman has, I don't know, maybe 100 years. And suddenly, when she starts doing that out of nowhere, her political career was over 2 months later. I mean, these people, that's why people's eyes are being opened, and they're being opened on that issue in particular. Because, you talk to people that are awake, of course they're going to notice that. I read her announcement on line, and she was just torn to shreds by people who liked her. It was like, "What are you doing? Why you ask us to fight and then you're quitting?" So was she threatened? I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that to when you look at anything, 9/11, any of the things I've talked about, or the 2020 election, all this stuff, people like me, I'm familiar with it. When I write about these things, it's always the same stuff. It's missing evidence, it's destroyed evidence, attacks by the media that comes right out of that 1967 CIA memo. Use friendly assets in the media, and they'll attack conspiracy theories. Crazy. Now they're Nazis or anti-Semites, or they just name call, and that's supposed to shut you down. But more and more young people, online at least, they don't have power yet, but they're not accepting it, and that's why they've always understood that. I had no one in the alt media, I don't think, outside of Ben Shapiro, who's not in the media, that thinks Oswald killed JFK. They all understand what a lie that was, and it just kind of led to more and more lies. Again, it's a domino effect, and so I feel confident now when people ask me about anything, so whatever they report, I'm assuming most of the time it's fake until proven otherwise, because they lie about everything. And that came from the JFK assassination. That wasn't natural. People were much more patriotic then. And if you do a graph, if you looked at a graph of American power and influence, I think if you looked at November 22nd, 1963, it could very well have been the apex, the height of American prosperity, influence, the way we were viewed in the eyes of the world, culture, everything about it, the way people looked. You didn't have, 70% obesity rate and all this. People were, as RFK Jr. likes to talk about, when his uncle was president, I think 3% or 6% of Americans had chronic illnesses. That's like diabetes and stuff. Now it's 70 some percent. So this is a huge, it's not because he was assassinated, but look at the changes that have happened in 60 some years. None of them for the better. None of them. Every job paid a living wage then, pretty much. So that, if you look at that chart, then from then it's a steady line down. And that's why I think, the American people ought to demand to know the exact answers as to what happened then, because they were able to kill a president in broad daylight. And then they trotted out this guy Oswald, who's curious background, and then they had Jack Ruby. And he's a 7-year-old. I'm watching that and I'm saying, wow, he shot him to shut him up. I mean,
Yes.
7-year-old. What else were you? I mean, when they did something that obvious, but people, even though patriotic people, not questioning the government, still that something clicked in their minds. And within a couple of years, the vast majority of them said, yeah, that was a conspiracy. We're being lied to. And they never thought they were being lied to by their government before. And now we come to this point 60 some years later where almost everybody thinks that the government lies at least some of the time. And most of us think they lie to us all the time.
It's interesting. I was talking to Congressman Ralph Hall right after we got done with his last election. I ran against him. We got to be really good friends. And he was telling a story about, I asked him, because he was the oldest living member of Congress to ever cast a vote. He's the last World War II veteran. And of course, he knew LBJ intimately. I mean, knew all these guys like John Connally. And one day I was talking to him about where he was on November 22nd, 1963. And he said, I was getting ready for dinner. I was supposed to go to Austin to meet up with Governor Connally and the president. So he was invited to the dinner that never was, because the motorcade, was supposed to go back to Love Field and then fly to Austin, because it would come from San Antonio that day and then Fort Worth and then Dallas. And it was supposed to go to Austin for dinner. So, Ralph was invited to that dinner, but he told me another story. He collected a lot of different memorabilia and he knew Mickey Mantle, all these people, but he was supposed to buy the pistol that shot Oswald. And his wife told him, Ralph, we don't profit off of other people's misery. So he didn't do it, but he was supposed to get it and he was going to sell it later or do something, but he was able to get access to it. And he just declined it. But that was an interesting segue into what I read after that, which was, this was in Roger Stone's book, which is actually I don't know if you've read that book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, Don. It's a pretty well-researched book on, it really puts LBJ in the spotlight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But one of the stories in there that I never forgot was Richard Nixon, who happened to be in Dallas on that same day. I think that the powers that be put him in that area is a kind of a ruse or something, or at least to put the suspicion over it. I don't think he had anything to do with it, but he was watching the coverage as soon as Ruby shoots Oswald, and they said that he turned like ghost white because he recognized Jack Ruby. And he recognized Jack Ruby from the House Un-American Activities Committee. Yes. And he was able, because he had Ruby as a witness, because he's part of this, Rubenstein, he's part of the Chicago mob, but he got Ruby's contact from LBJ's office. So, I mean, these interconnected things, and that's why, it's impolite back then to talk about it. But that's definitely history's run by a series of conspiracies, and that's called research, and that's why we're thankful to have Don Jeffries still out there doing the heavy lifting on the hidden history.
Well, trying. I don't mean to. Ashley's not getting a chance to talk. Ashley, I don't want to take all your time.
I'm gonna go to her. We got half an hour left.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. I was gonna ask her what she thought on that, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Want to lead from that, Ashley?
Okay, so I did want to say a couple quick things. So Tony and I had talked about this before the show, but I was kind of relating like whoever facilitated the assassination to the cryptocracy that is referred to by Walter Boert in Operation Mind Control, because there was so many different interested factions. And you had already said this, that there were so many people that could have wanted him dead. And I certainly think that the Vietnam point is really interesting because there was such horror that resulted from that conflict in a million different ways. And there were people that came back as broken, and it still affects their family to this day. So there's a Chuck O'Celli, who is a JFK researcher as well, and he talks about that being a linchpin for him is the fact that his father was a Vietnam vet. And in the book, A Perfect War, the Techno War in Vietnam, he talks about how at the beginning of that November that Kennedy was beginning to make changes with the Central Intelligence Agency, like the agents that were over there, shaking things up, moving people around, removing people from that. And that was at the beginning of February November. And then by the end of that month that he would be dead. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up and get your thoughts on this before we move to Marjorie Taylor is that in when you were talking about Nixon being placed in Texas at that time, in the book Family of Secrets by Russ Baker, he also says that George H.W. was in Texas, but he claimed that he did not remember where he was that day, which would have been obviously like what Don is saying. This is a cornerstone history moment. It's like 9/11 for millennials. There's no way you're forgetting where you were. And then he goes on to talk about a letter that Barbara Bush had written to her family. And he picks this apart and he's like, she wasn't close to her family. Who was she writing this to? She famously didn't speak to her parents. Her kids were not, it wasn't like she was writing her kids back home. So what is going on here? Now, I've had, I think it was Chuck O'Celli that told me he did not think that that Bush was really involved. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that before we moved on. But I just thought that was such an interesting bullet point of all of these people just happening to be in Texas at that day.
Yeah, well, it is, and I agree with Chuck. I don't, and again, I think the same thing for JFK Jr. A lot of people think Bush ordered that and everything. It's just, I don't think it happens that way. I had a guest on my show once that thought George H.W. Bush was a gunman. He believes he was in the records bill. I said, really? You think we think the son of the Bushes are a Mayflower family. His father was a powerful senator, Prescott Bush. And no, they had to, I said, okay, whatever. But people have taken a picture of somebody that from a distance, I mean, looked like a typical white guy in 1963, kind of short hair in a suit. It's kind of hard to tell them apart. And none of them overweight. And from a distance, I guess it could have been George Bush, but we don't know that for sure. Yes, he did forgive it, but Nixon also couldn't remember who he was at times, too. I believe E. Howard Hunt had that same issue, apparently. All Americans except for them. But no, I think that, and I've tried to point out, George H.W. Bush would have been a pretty young guy in 1963. So they used that. There's a note out there that is from George Bush of the CIA. It was pretty, I don't know, 15 years ago or so that first came out. And he starts talking about the assassination, but I don't know if that's the same guy, but regardless, he was too young. His father was still alive. So Prescott Bush would have been one if they were going in that direction. So I think people, they want to, because he was around then still, and so they want to look at identifiable figures. People, when I was young, people used to want to say it was Nixon, because Nixon famously, he was, I think, in Texas to attend a Pepsi convention or something, and then he told another story or whatever. But I don't think it's, again, I think the people that do this are above that level. And yes, LBJ was pretty obvious, but I think it's because he was just stupid and a really bad actor, and he couldn't hide how happy he was. He was giddy, and that was, it was also the beginning of the famous feud between. It had happened before, but after November 22nd, RFK Jr. RFK Sr. hated him because of the way he acted and demanded that Jackie stand next to him and take the oath of office. And one anecdote I found that I talked about in American Memorial that was new to me is that is credibly sourced that when RFK was shot in 1968, LBJ supposedly paced the floor of the White House all night long and kept calling and saying, "Is he dead yet?" I mean, so that's what kind of psychopath he was. But yeah, so I don't think that. I think we need to look elsewhere. You want to look at conspirators, then McGeorge Bundy, him writing that new National Security Action Memorandum 273, the day of the assassination. I think that indicts him as also the fact he was not in Dallas. He was in the White House, and he went to the White House Situation Room. And at the day of the assassination, all of JFK's cabinet, all his cabinet members were very curiously on the way to Hawaii for a meeting. So they were all in the air at the time. And so he contacted, and researchers have tried to find the tapes from Air Force One and these and we never got the intact tapes to see what exactly was said. But we do know that he told the cabinet members that the president had been shot, and they already had the man, and there was no conspiracy. And this was before anything was known about Oswald. Fletcher Prouty used to talk a lot about this. So to me, that indicts him. If I'm doing an investigation, he would be one of the first people I would call as a real investigation. But the first people I would call would be the Secret Service agents, because they made it happen. And you had Emory Roberts, who was in charge on at the ground level that day, who called very famously. If you've seen the video of Henry, I think it's Henry Ripka, and I was the first researcher to get through to him with my help from my friend William Law. And I talked to his granddaughter, and William talked to his son, and I think that was him that's saying, "What the F," like throwing his hands up. If you've seen film footage at Love Field, because he's pulled off the motorcade. He's supposed to be jogging alongside the motorcade, which he normally did. They pulled him off, and he obviously wasn't in the loop. And so he keeps saying, "Well, what the hell," And he died very young, like a lot of these guys. But Emory Roberts is the one who waved him off. And then later in the car, when they had about 6-7 seconds to react to gunfire, and none of the Secret Service agents jumped and ran, the little bit of distance and shielded JFK, which they should have done. They could have saved his life. One of them tried to, before Clint Hill, who ran belatedly after his head was blown off. But John Reddy tried to go, and Emory Roberts stopped him. So again, if it's a real, and then of course Bill Gurr, the driver, what are you doing stopping or almost stopping the car? 57 witnesses unconnected to each other, including the mayor's wife, said the motorcade stopped. What sense is that? And everybody said it. You can see the brake lights in the photos. So that's, again, contrary to training. And when you heard the first shot, Greer should have been trained to accelerate out of there. Instead, we can see him turn and look over his shoulder and watch Kennedy's head get blown off. So these are the people that a real investigation would have called first, and you would have confronted them. You wouldn't have, as Jackson D. Barrett talked about. Yeah, we didn't see this Zapruder film until 1975. Now there were some bootleg films that were up there, so I'd seen them, but they were not until Good Night America, Geraldo Rivera showed it with Dick Gregory and Robert Groden. And today's Robert Groden's birthday, by the way, too. He's still around. But so when you look at the performance of the Secret Service, that's where an investigation should have started. They did nothing. They didn't criticize much as 9/11, even if you look at an innocuous reason for that. At the very least, they stood down and let this all happen. But no one was punished. No one was held accountable. No one was investigated. The exact same thing happened with JFK. Nobody questioned the Secret Service. And, Flint Hill just died last year. And, this guy ended up making a lot of money writing books about it, lying and, talking about how, JFK was reckless. And they basically blamed him for his own assassination, which was nonsense. Vince Panorama, a friend of mine, has done a lot of good work with the Secret Service. And he talked to all these guys, and they said he never interfered with their job at all. He let them do he let them do their job. And so that's, again, I've kind of ranting, but if they had wanted to investigate the crime and they didn't, and that's why the takeaway from anybody, when you ask about the Kennedy assassination, there's never been an investigation. I discovered that early on because the Warren Report is 888 pages of conclusions. And they had 26 volumes of hearings and exhibits. And as Alan Dulles said, nobody's going to read this. The public doesn't read. It was read. There were a few people like Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg, and later people like me, that I went to my library and read this stuff. And most of it's meaningless. Most of it's, you can see them padding the record. They found somebody, you talk about a limited conspiracy. people like Arlen Specter, who was a young counsel then, who invented the single bullet theory and was at the center of building the cover-up. This guy was totally corrupt. He, they found somebody like a woman who had babysat the infant Lee Harvey Oswald and hadn't seen the Oswald family since then. And she testified as a witness in the Kennedy assassination. And they rambled on for page after page, yet they never located the umbrella man. They never identified him. They never identified the babushka lady who can be seen wearing a babushka and is taking the best home movie of the assassination, much better than Zapruder's. They've never seen her film. They never located her. I know one woman claims to be, but I don't. We've never seen her film anyhow. They didn't call Admiral Berkeley, who was the president's personal physician, who was the recipient of all the medical evidence, who was in the motorcade, not where he usually was, but was in the motorcade, was at Parkland Hospital, was at Bethesda for the crappy autopsy. He wasn't called as a witness. Some of the closest witnesses to the assassination weren't called. Some of them were never even identified. Yet they located a woman that babysat the infant Lee Harvey Oswald. Another woman, I think, was friends with Marguerite Oswald when she never even knew Lee Harvey Oswald. So why were these people testifying? And why were the counsels like Arlen Specter, asking, where did you go to school? Who did you marry? Where did you work? I mean, it's padding the record. Anybody can see it. So you have to really sift through the record. That's, purposeful stuff. And there's nothing benign about that whatsoever. So that's when I started reading it. I thought, whoa, this is really, this is mind-blowing how big it is. So I get carried away with it. You can tell when I still talk about it. I used to do this when I was young at parties, and sometimes people liked it. And
it's my favorite.
There was one party I was at where I started, in the middle of the night, and they started calling people to come back to the party. But most of the time, it didn't work out that successfully because, again, unfortunately, in those days, you didn't have people that were awake to anything, even the JFK assassination. But some young people like me were getting to that point. But I can't imagine it. That's one advantage people young have today because there's a lot of, especially females. God, I never met any girl that was interested in hearing me talk about the JFK assassination for a long time. And now you've got, people like Ashley, and there's so many people out there that are talking truth. So anyhow,
well, you paved the way, sir. You went ahead and jumped on the barbed wire so we could run over and continue the assault on the truth. So appreciate you. Let's change gears because we got just a little bit of time left. Love the history, and that's one for the archives. Everybody who's listening, you got that's not Cliff Notes. That's like the essence of truth. That's distilled truth, the derivative of the JFK assassination distilled for you, ladies and gents, right there. Let's talk about the current reality. I think there's two different things going on that are taking some headlines on like political rifts. One of them is real, I believe, and one of them is fake. They could both be fake. But we looked at the story with Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is a zero hedge. She says, I refuse to be a battered wife. That's the direct quote from her video message. And then you have this meeting between Mondami and Trump in the White House, and that was supposed to be a big feud, and Trump's a fascist and he's a communist and all this other stuff. Thoughts on these two things, Ashley?
So we had touched on this, a little bit before we started today. So I have, if I may put on my tinfoil hat for a moment,
You may.
I thank you very much. I was thinking that it's because it has been a theory of mine for a while that it was necessary for, if we truly believe that we are on this, the technocratic tiptoe, and that we are moving towards whatever you want to refer to it, whether it is like corporate fascism with technology or communitarianism or all of these combined, the New World Order, whatever you want to say. But I have felt like it was really important to mix up people's ideology. So we know, heading into this, like even as late as the 90s and the 2000s, that people still had somewhat of, even though we're in mostly the two-party paradigm, they still had values and maybe some principle that aligned with a particular party, right? I'm not saying that everybody was perfect, but I'm saying that there was maybe a little bit more of that there. And gradually, particularly with the introduction of Trump on this stage, there has been fracturing and division. We know that on a mass scale that has been cultivated by algorithms and manipulation of people's behavior online, and the war on empathy and the war on us with all this information, all these things. But essentially, I think that it is really important for next steps that there is no cohesion in any party whatsoever. So this is what I believe. If this were to be being facilitated, the fallout with Marjorie Taylor Greene, then I think that that is because we have fractured the conservative party or the Republican Party, whatever that used to be, in a million different ways. That was what was scattered into 1,000 pieces into the wind, because we had the label of neocons. We had and people that didn't necessarily subscribe to that. We had people that were never Trumpers. We had MAGA. We had Q. And it's continuing to fracture in a million different ways, because we see somebody who was saying a lot of really reasonable things that could be very much related to. And then we see her ouster here. And so perhaps this isn't manufactured. And I'm not saying that I know that it is. I'm just saying I think it's a possibility, and it would play into the continued fracture of whatever conservative used to be and used to stand for and used to mean. And then it is possible that she genuinely has this, she's now become disillusioned with Donald Trump, that she believed and subscribed to what he was saying, and that she had a realization. I'm not sure, but those are just my thoughts. That, I mean, I'm not saying that this is manufactured, but I'm saying if it were to be, then it does have a play. It would factor into an agenda for sure. It would help things be moving along, but it may not be.
Don, what do you think? Is this an unraveling of MAGA? Is this further blowback from the why are we still talking about the Epstein guy to all this the periphery stuff around the failures of this administration so far and the MAGA movement?
Well, it's very curious timing, and it doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. I don't understand why would you quit? I mean, basically, yeah, again, for the last couple months, suddenly Marjorie Taylor Greene has started talking about Zionism and Israel and Jews. She never did before, and starts talking about how Trump is, which he is subservient to them, which he is, and starts talking about the Epstein files and everything. It talks about how she's standing for the women, and then suddenly right after the Epstein vote, I guess the Epstein files vote, she announces she's quitting because Trump trashed her in one of his typical stupid tweets where he made up with a dumb nickname for her, which is his specialty, Marjorie Trader Brown or something for some reason, and it's a bad look. And what's right, man, people, it didn't take long. I looked online. I didn't know this, but apparently the date she chose, January 5th, is 2 days after she qualifies for her congressional pension. So it looks really bad. Makes it look like I'm waiting till then so I can take the pension. So I don't know, but it's disillusioning because somebody like me, I fall for these people sometimes, and I try to, RFK Jr. and Massey and people like this, and I think maybe I'm naive about it, but they say things and I agree with them, Tucker Carlson and everything, and she was saying some good stuff I agree with, but it's disillusioning because it makes it look like, well, was she ever legitimate? She seemed like what I liked about her, she could have qualified as one of my redneck relatives. We used to get together every year with these people for a pig roast. I could see her there. She would fit right in. And so she seemed genuine for whatever it was. So she seemed like a real person. And I don't know what this means, but I do know that her political career seems over, and Trump will probably exult over this. And it looked like it was down to a couple voices in Congress, her and Thomas Massey, who Trump is also somebody, Peter, I think, was talking about, how are they going to get rid of Massey? I don't know. Apparently somebody got rid of his wife last year, and then he's been criticized for remarrying, and Trump said some awful things about him, as he did to her. So what happens when these people give up? I don't understand it, because as she's saying, fight, the people need to fight. How, the people have no fight in them. And if the few leaders they have that look like they're genuine, if they give up like that, I mean, it's just, again, it's more disillusioning. And I personally don't see how, even 1/10 of the American people are still voting, because they may just, fudge the numbers and make it so it doesn't look that bad. But this is very disillusioning. I don't, some rumors are that she's going to run for president. I don't know. I don't see that happening. She'll be attacked nonstop if she does that, as would Massey. And but at some point, they can't, especially with the alt media creating so many young people talking more and more about Zionism and the power of Israel. They can't, as I've said, they can't defend. Zionism is impossible to defend. And so you just go. So, you have the Ben Shapiro and Mark Levine also very famously hissed at her when she started talking about her. It said that she should be prosecuted. She should be prosecuted for criticizing Israel. This is the way they feel. If you look at those really strident Jews like Mark Levine and Ben Shapiro, Laura Loomer is another one now, who's constantly, these are they have to be agents of Israel. I think, and Roseanne Barr, if you heard what she did, she just went nuts the other day too, saying America will be destroyed and we're coming. And she's acting like a witch, like she was putting a spell on it. It's like, well, she was in our world. So people are starting to understand this is a demarcation line here in the alt-right. When you may be right on a lot of things and sound right on a lot of stuff, but no, we can't question Israel. Well, more and more young people are questioning Israel. They're looking at, people, all the homeless people in the streets and the jobs out there offering no opportunities to young Americans, people not afford to not being able to afford rent, let alone buying homes. Start families. This is awful, and we were supposed to continue to be stressing Israel all the time. So it's very, very sad. I don't know what to think of it, but all I know is that it's another apparent good one is going to be leaving public service.
I agree with that. I think there's some real genuine qualities to MTG. I didn't care much for her broad spectrum of politics because I thought she was short-sighted in a lot of things. But towards the end here, and much like what was, and again, someone in the chat was saying, look, the Charlie Kirk assassination was the shot across the bow for everybody.
Yeah,
criticizing. I mean, you saw these podcasters coming out now saying, especially the big ones, are like, "Hey, I have no interest in killing myself. I will never do that." If it's people already saying I've been threatened by Israel or those supporters of it. There's some. I mean, we can see the darkness there. So, if you ever been to Washington like I have, if you've been in the halls of power, you've been around some of these people, and you see how some of it works. At least briefly, I was there. I wanted to get out of it, especially if you're if you're ideologically intact and you care about ideas. That's where ideas go to die. I mean, that's where you have to fight off all the bad energy because it's all a pageant. Like most of it's just fake. Mm-hmm. So it's if you're there, you can make a much more of a difference in the public narrative and ideas in the realms of actually changing hearts and minds than you can in Washington. That's my opinion. Although we do need people to represent us there, I think we need a complete deconstruction of the entire process of how politics works. You have a 5% approval rating and a 96% incumbency rate. I mean, these things can't, you talked about that yesterday on your show with Vince Agnelli, Don.
Yeah.
Well, we're running short on time, at least because I've got to open up the shop here in Denison, Texas. I'm covering from my son, Houston. So did you two want to run the show a little bit longer and take stuff from the audience, Don, or do you need a hard stop?
Yeah, I can go a little bit longer if Ashley wants to.
Ashley, do you want to go a little bit longer?
Yeah, I can do that. The only question is, as you're hosting, Tony, does Don have the ability to see the chats and do all that stuff?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Can you see the chats, Ashley?
No. Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. And Don has the ability to end the stream, but I can also do that. If you need me to come back, I can. I just need to make sure that the door's open.
Yeah, I could go maybe 15 minutes or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Good. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Well, Ashley, so, and the other thing people have talked in the, and I want to say, first of all, if Marjorie Taylor Greene was actually threatened, then it says, again, it says a lot about us. And I wish if she was threatened, I wish she would say she was. You know, that's what I would come out and say it, and say where the threat came from. You know, a lot of
Right.
these people say they got threats. Who threatened you? Let me know. Did it come
Right.
from the Trump administration? Did it come from Israel? Ben Shapiro? Who threatened you? We need to hear that. And then that puts the onus on them. They can say she's crazy or whatever, but then why is she leaving Congress? But I wanted to talk about the Mandamo, who that's the other big thing, as you noted too, coming to the White House. And, you know, this is, again, and this is what makes MAGA, the Trump MAGA, so infuriating, is that this guy was demonized and he's the worst guy ever. He's a communist and all this stuff. And so why is he coming to the White House? Why are you inviting someone? You're besmirching Massey. You've apparently forced Marjorie Taylor Greene to leave, who are the closest ones in Congress to your original MAGA rhetoric, maybe, or at least some of it. And yet this guy who is against everything you claim to stand for, and he hasn't, curiously, he didn't make up a nickname for him for some reason. You know, and you invite him to the White House, and he looked like a giddy schoolgirl. That look on his face when he's looking up at you, like my daughter with the Jonas Brothers or something. I mean, he just looked up at like he's never what? What does that mean? I mean, I don't, what are your thoughts on that, Ashley?
I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. So in looking at the information warfare that we are in, or if you think that we're in a psychological warfare, or if you subscribe to what Yuri Bezmenov said, that, you know, we're in this demoralization campaign, and or that's done, that's over, we're moving on to the next phase of that. I don't have the answer, but I think all of these things are in my consideration. Things that I'm constantly thinking about are the history and the development of mind control techniques, what they have found out, how to export that to us. So how are we still trying, or how are they still trying to manipulate us at this time? So I consider a huge portion of what we would call alternative media to be, I refer to it as Mockingbird 2.0. Some people refer to it as Laurel Canyon 2.0. Either way, but I think that we have to know that that is a really powerful tool in regards to having a counterbalance or something to counteract the mainstream media. And do we really think that people who have so much power and who have already stated through the Operation Mockingbird that they want to be involved in media, that they're just going to let that go? That the same people that own all the tech companies that affect our algorithms, that we're not going to be manipulated? So what I am always trying to think is, how are we being manipulated in this situation? And I do allow for the fact that maybe that isn't happening in X, Y, and Z, right? But I just try to keep my mind open. So I in what is happening with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think that, like you said, maybe she genuinely really was threatened. Maybe not. And if so, then why aren't they releasing the information? Because we deserve to know what is truly happening if you know who is threatening you. Because she has said that she got threats. She has said that she's been harassed. And I believe that. And then as far as the situation with Mamdani and having these two be really friendly with each other, I found it curious as well. Now, part of me thinks that absurdity is a requirement for the ritual that we're experiencing right now, for this spiritual battle that we find ourselves in. I think that maybe there's a piece of that. And it does seem very absurd to be in the situation of exactly what you said. You have these people that are ardent MAGA fans. They stand with Trump no matter what. And then you do see him speaking negatively about people that appear to be principled from Congress, and then somebody that has the polar opposite, outwardly facing, at least, the polar opposite opinions in politics, right? So I think that the absurdity is an element of this. I think it is confusing for people. And maybe that is intentional. You know, I don't necessarily fully understand what's going on. Now, I think that it would be horrible to, if this, all of what we see is legitimate, that there was some cooperation and that there would actually be some improvements for people. I don't hate that idea, right? Billy is hopeful about Mamdani, and I hope for him and for other people that live in New York City that there is legitimacy to be had there. But it doesn't make sense to me either, Don. I don't understand this cooperation and not addressing these issues. That's part of what makes me think that it's absurdity intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, especially because it's great for you to get along at it. Yeah, as I said, Mondami, I don't see how he can do worse than Cuomo or any of the other alleged non-communists. But the idea that this guy Trump, that's why I call him Trumpenstein. I call it the Trumpenstein Project because he's so irate at Massey for wanting to release the Epstein files, and Marjorie Taylor Greene for wanting to do the same thing and talking about Israel. And yet he has this guy Mondami who is perceived to be, I would think, a bigger enemy of Israel than Marjorie Taylor Greene. I would think he's their nightmare, maybe, but he had a lot of powerful Jewish interests backing his election, shockingly enough. And he has a background where his mother's a big Bollywood producer, and he's a typical installed guy. But so Trump shouldn't want this guy in the White House. I mean, why? First of all, what would be the point? Why was he this? Trump doesn't, him making deals. What kind of deals is he making with the mayor of New York City? But this is a guy, he can't make a deal with Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey. No, we got to get rid of them because they questioned me. But this guy Mondami, who I would think, and why did he go? Is he legitimate? Why would he go to the White House? You have sports teams that won't go see Trump because he's Trump when they win the championship. Lots of these athletes won't do that. Why is this guy going there? Shouldn't I would think the people that really support Mondami would question that too. Why? What are you doing? Doesn't that make you look bad? Like you're not really you're not keeping it real? And so I don't know, but I just thought it was a curious look, and Trump's, like I said, that look of orgasmic look he had on his face when he's looking up at the guy. It's unbelievable the look he has on his face, which he's noted for having kind of crazy looks, but it made no sense. And this is the same guy welcoming in there that has gotten arguments with all the people that support him, Elon Musk and Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So very, very curious. But we have lots and lots of people in the chat room, people that many, very familiar names. David, John Basculin, good to see you. Raybo, I believe Raybo is from the land down under. White Wolf, Angel Blue, Karen Carpenter, I remember seeing Jackson T. Barrett, hum guitar. I believe Piper Fogel was in here, Kenneth and Powers. Lots and lots of people here. George Chris Buchan, my old friend there. I don't think I missed any questions. So somebody was asking me about my parents in Pearl Harbor. No, my parents never. Nobody questioned anything back then. My dad did question the Jews. That's where I heard that growing up a lot. But he loved FDR, so he wasn't going to question. He was not going to question that. So unfortunately, again, that's why. But he did question the JFK assassination because everybody did. So I think that was a turning point, and they had never questioned anything before. He was a good Democrat and voted for FDR all 4 times. And I don't know what he'd think about my writing about FDR. You're running for the wrong guy. It's like millions of other people did, but I don't know. Anything you see interesting in the chat, Ashley?
Well, I just wanted to say hello to some of those folks, and I did see Karen and Harps and a couple of other people there, and I'm very happy to be in the to have had the opportunity to come on today and have these discussions with you, especially about JFK. But in overall, I think that we find ourselves, and I know that we know this, but a really strange time, and I honestly think that the absurdity is so important for moving forward, Don. I think it's important to try to keep people confused. I believe that we could refer to the works of Machiavelli or Sun Tzu or any number of other people that confusing your enemy, if we truly are the enemy of what I refer to as the predator class, and they truly subscribe to, we want to live forever, we want the earth to ourselves. If that is actually what is happening, then we would be the enemy. So you would pull no punches. There is nothing that you would not try. There is no operation. There is no data that you wouldn't collect. There is no experiment that you would not do. there is no confusion campaign that you would not try to pull out on the enemy, because I think that is part of it. When you're buried in information and you have all of these sales techniques and hypnosis techniques and mind control techniques, then what are we doing here, right? And I think that they're these sleight of hand, like magic, basically, to confuse people, to take your eye off the ball, to make it difficult to get a consensus on any issue, no matter how important it is or how very obvious. Like what we're talking about with Trump, it is very obvious that he has betrayed the MAGA base for whatever he ever said he represented. And like you were talking about with JFK, and like with war crimes in Vietnam and a million other instances, there is no accountability. There is no accountability for these people. They have no consequences for what they're doing. But if people were able to get on the same page, then maybe they could push back and try to get some accountability for what are you doing? This is what you said that you were going to do, and then you didn't do anything that is actually beneficial to the people whatsoever. And then it's business as usual for big government, essentially.
No, absolutely. Good to see my friend RB Ham from the Great Wide North. Good to see you here, my friend. Rain Cry 5276 and Hum Guitar asked me, what do you think of Mike Huckabee meeting with the real traitor Jonathan Pollard? Yeah, well, again, I think that maybe Trump will name Pollard some kind of ambassador or something. Why not? And
right.
it was, I'm sure he supports him, but personally, to me, I was really depressed to learn that my friend Naomi Wolf, who wrote a foreword to one of my books, Rival the Richest, she interviewed Pollard. And unfortunately, Naomi was a sweet lady, but a lot of this, as is happening with Roseanne Barr, the tribalism is coming out in people. And she is now really fiercely pro-Israel, which I don't think she was before. But to interview Jonathan Pollard, really, and sympathetically, she was a sympathetic interview, and I gotta say he shouldn't be interviewed. But and then for Mike Huckabee, but Mike Huckabee, it makes more sense because Mike Huckabee is one of the worst of the Christian evangelicals that I wrote about recently that make Zionism possible. Without them, you could not. Zionism is indefensible. If you saw that interview with Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, you saw Ted Cruz try to defend it. You can't. It's impossible. So ultimately, all you can do is get mad and contorted like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro do, and call names. And that people, more and more people are not satisfied with that, and more and more people don't care about being called anti-Semitic because, first of all, it's a stupid term. It's not even accurate because Semitic means part of the Middle East. So just say anti-Jewish and be more accurate about it. And nobody cares. It's like being called racist. It's irrelevant, because it's just basically if somebody criticizes Israel, somebody says something you don't like, well, you just call them anti-Semitic. It doesn't scare people anymore. I don't think, or at least I hope it doesn't. But anyhow, we're just about. I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes. Anything else you wanted to say, Ashley, or anything that we didn't cover?
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot that we could continue to get into, and I could continue picking your brain on JFK and the events surrounding all of that. But I think that we've covered enough in just that. It's interesting to continue to have these discussions and to point out things that don't make sense to us and things that it should be this way in a sane world, and it isn't, and that there aren't really any good answers. I think especially with the Marjorie Taylor Greene situation and the Mamdani, what is he actually going to be doing? Like, what policies is he going to be enacting? And then his relationship with Trump. Just from an observer of politics, I think it's just going to be interesting for us to see how this goes.
Oh yeah, no, it is, and it's good to see Karen Carpenter saying some nice things about me. And her, yeah, it's again, I have a lot of hope that people that are closer to your age than mine are opening or awakening. There's more and more awake people than we've ever had before. The problem is, as I say, everybody that holds a position of power is asleep or they're serving these people. We don't have people that are awake in positions of power. I guess you could say Thomas Massie is, I think. But even him, as much as I love the guy, the legislation, the bill to release the Epstein files, people have pointed out that in there it says unclassified material. So, does that mean they can still classify stuff? I mean, why would you put that in? I mean, I hope that wasn't him that did it and he has people and maybe he just overlooked it, but it's hard not to be cynical about all this stuff. But at this point, people, when you live in the internet age and you have all these people like us analyzing these things and showing, basically, if people don't understand it, we're showing them how much they lie and everything. So for people to still be going out and, voting for these same people, I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. The MAGA people, however many of them support Israel, but 70 to 80 million of them, are awake to some degree. They voted for Trump. I don't think you can put them back in the bottle. I don't think you can get them to vote for Marco Rubio. I hope that's not the case, and I hope they don't go back to sleep and that they were only awake because Trump's personality worked on them or whatever. But I hope that this leads to something that people start questioning, because ultimately, what we mentioned is that we have one great weapon on our side, and that's an incredible advantage in numbers. And I talk about this all the time. We have hundreds of millions more of us than them in the United States, and billions more of us than them around the world. We should be able to stop them from subverting us and misruling us and terrorizing us. But so far we haven't been able, because if we can't get together, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go. People might live near Washington, D.C. I'm not going to go to any marches there unless I know there's going to be at least hundreds of thousands of people. I don't want to get tased and thrown in prison, denied due process like the January 6 people. We have to come together. We need literally millions of people marching on all the cities in this country and unanimously, for one reason, stop the corruption. Represent us, because we have taxation without representation, as Jefferson said, where the people fear the government. You have tyranny. Where the government fear the people, you have liberty. There's no question about what we have.
For sure.
Possibly, I think that, but anyhow, so I would love to stay long. I'd like to talk. Well, invite me on your show sometime. I would love to talk to you more, because I think it's you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate all the people in the chat. And think about the JFK assassination today, 62 years ago, and what happened, and what kind of started this ball rolling. Anything you have to say or promote or anything, Ashley?
Well, we have our Knights of the Storm coming up at 2 p.m. over on Rumble, so I would encourage people to check that out. We're going to be speaking with whistleblower Michelle Spencer, who has worked as a nurse in a hospital near where Karen's stomping grounds are, and she's exposing and has been trying to blow the whistle on a high number of what they refer to as fetal demise, but it's babies that are dying before they, before they had a chance really to be born, and then the additional fallout from that she's associating with the COVID shots. So that's coming up. We would love for you to come and join us. Go check us out in the chat. And then I just want to say again that I'm very thankful for this opportunity and for having the chance to speak with you and Tony today. And I would love to come back and talk to you again.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. You're always welcome. Karen Carpenter, who is one of your co-hosts over there, says open door all the time. Night Store, Jason Barker. You got some good people there. So
yeah,
appreciate that. Of course, we don't have music. So anyhow, we'll just say so long. We went over a little bit for you guys today, but it's wonderful being with you, Ashley. We'll talk again soon.
You too, Don.
Thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for listening to America Unplugged. We'll see you next week at the same time. And don't forget my show, I Protest, every Friday on these same live streaming platforms at 5 p.m. Eastern.
And your Substack, Don.
And my Substack, DonaldJeffries@Substack.com. I hope everybody here is subscribing to me. Also named
the only place that he's not shadow banned. That's yes, Don's line.
You got it memorized. Yeah, that's my line. But it's true. So anyhow, yeah, please subscribe to me on Substack, DonaldJeffries@Substack.com. Take care, everyone. See you later. Don't burn the house down.